So Grady's talk was really interesting, I thought, and it made a really nice segue into this one. So we're going to talk a little bit about economics ranching in Colorado. I'm going to try to break it into three areas. First, talking about the direct and indirect economic effects of cow-calf operations in Colorado, and then trying to branch out into some of the themes that Grady was talking about in terms of diversification of the ecological processes, then lead to a diversification of the economic processes, which then result in a more resilient farm and ranch operation and improved economic returns. So it's supposed to be a cute title, Wetlands, Windmills, and Wapiti. We'll talk about that a little bit. So several speakers this morning talked about how ranching has value beyond agricultural production. However, very often the direct management of the ranch is all about agricultural production. So among the things we'll try to hit on is how diversification into some of those other ecosystem services might be a good idea in some situations. Now, part of the piece of that we need to recognize is that a ranch is functioning within a community, within a broader human community. And in many cases, that human community can help to encourage certain types of behavior or hinder certain types of decision-making on ranches. So the community economic base is very often dependent on agriculture, or on resource base, and the quality of life is often very dependent upon what's going on in the rural parts of the county or the community. So economic base. For a 400 cow ranch, which is one particularly large in the state of Colorado, we have some estimates that tell us that the total economic value of that to a operation and to the local community is around $600,000 per year, with 273 of that falling to the ranch. It's not profit, and ranch operations, and then secondary effects of a multiple. The famous multiplier effect of it's like about 1.5 will get you all the insurance, lawyers, all the transport that you purchase, the veterinary services, all those things. Those come up to about $329,000, and for a total of about $602,000. That is not a small economic contribution to a local community. That can be broken down into earnings and jobs and average jobs, and this is a relatively reasonably high quality job. If we extrapolate that, and this we can extrapolate to the level of the state, where we have more or less 127,000 cattle, we're looking at total value of production of about $500 million, total economic impact of close to $1 billion, with employment of around 11,000, total earnings on farm to about 407, or on the ranch to about 407 million, and total investment, including all of ranch buildings, infrastructure, and everything that goes into cattle operation, of about $11 billion in the state. Now, agriculture is, as we all know here, not a small proportion of the land use in the state. You can look at the average size of ranches in the western Rocky Mountain region. You see in Colorado about 1,500 acres, and in some states that are have much more land and far fewer people, you see a lot larger size ranches. Now, what that means is when ranches are converted, they can have some major impacts on small communities. So when Robbie was talking about Pickton County, it does not take very many ranches converted to change the culture of the local community. At 1,500 acres per, you could actually see substantial changes. Recreational amenities. Now, if you've been to Steamboat, you know that the recreational amenities that are available in that small town are good enough for maybe 100,000 people. It's insane. Now, that is great if you live there, and because usually you can get that paid for by the tourists. But it turns out that that's less important to these tourists than the other three having to do with outdoor recreation activities, or lifestyle, or views. Community services, urban development, not important to these folks at all. So we can translate that into economic activity. We can say, all right, if we were to develop this land, what would you do? Would you spend less time here or more time here? And so in this particular case, we found that people would spend 2.3 days less traveling to Broward County on average. 2.3 days translates into dollars. We found out that people were spending about $100 a day, and so by multiplying, essentially, the reduction in days times the amount that they would have spent, times the number of tourists, we could come up with a number that would be lost if those folks didn't come. That's about $36 million per year by converting that ranch open space. So now, CJ's looking at this policy saying, okay, $1 million budget, $36 million bonus. Sounds like it probably pencils out. And that's the kind of analysis we would look at. In Chaffee County, we got fancy. We wanted to link ranch working landscapes to water quality. So a lot of the tourism in Chaffee County surrounds the river. And so we wanted to say, if people recognize that connection, and if they'd be willing to pay to preserve ranch open space or ranch working landscapes, and or to improve water quality in the area in order to support either the hiking activities or their boating or whatever it is that they're doing. So we asked them, it's called a choice experiment, about changing the water quality from boatable, which is the poorest locally, to fishable, to swimmable. And the change, and we also had them look at scenarios having to do with farm and ranch open space that would be more and more and more developed, that is converting more and more ranch open space. Now, if you've been to Seidl and Vista, they're not particularly big urban centers, right? And so one might argue that some development would be okay. So we actually gave them the opportunity to say more or less development or somewhere in between. And what we come up with here? In both cases, we came up with willingness to pay among tourists of somewhere in the order of $5 million per year, both for working landscapes and for water quality. We did a similar treatment for residents. And residents were a bit lower. There are, in fact, not as many, and local residents. So it was in the order of $1.5 to $2 million per year. But here again, this is a pretty big budget, if you will, or amount of value that could potentially be captured and returned to the people who are providing that stewardship on the land. This is the one having to do with water quality, again, about $6 million. So in general, the approach is to recognize the ecosystem services that are being provided, demonstrate their value, and then find policy to capture them. By capturing them, we can incentivize behavior that is better for the community and better for the local operator. But what's available to us? And I put this first one up here on purpose. Agricultural zoning is an option. It is an option. But what are the distributional impacts of that? That means that the tourist captures all that value, and the landowner captures none. The resident who's not a landowner captures the value, but the landowner captures none. No, it's no surprise that's not a particularly popular alternative among landowners in the state of Colorado. So we tend to go toward these incentive-based approaches, conservation initiatives, and try to figure out ways that conservation finance can help to support those sorts of initiatives. What could we use? We could use sales taxes. If we use sales taxes, who benefits? Who is the cost? Okay? If it's a sales tax, everybody who's around pays a similar amount or a proportion of what their income is. That might be considered equitable, depending on what you think how people are benefiting. Lodging taxes or mill levies are also some very common ways to go about supporting this. The argument there is that the lodging tax, the tourists are benefiting the most from these provisions, or they just want to stay to the tourists. That could be it. Mill levy is a property tax, of course, and that says that those people who are actually probably richer, those who are living in nicer houses or bigger houses, more expensive houses, are benefiting more from the open space provision than other people. So we can look at the distributional impacts of these potential policy solutions, trace through them, and try to figure out for each community what is the most appropriate portfolio of activities in order to create the income we need in order to preserve that ranch open space. And that's some of the stuff that we've been doing. This picture is, I think this was taken in Utah. This is the only one in this group that I didn't take. They've got the mobile home in the back. They're trying to figure out where it should go. It's kind of classic. Yeah. Classic is they're pointing in different directions, perhaps. Yeah. So where do we want to go with this? Which direction? Why would we choose one direction? So in order to take a stronger look at some of these policy solutions, we probably need to know what the public perception is of both the problem and the solutions. We don't want to go around taxing people willy-nilly, especially in the West. It's really not very popular. And we don't want to tax people that we don't have to. However, if we're benefiting, if we're willing to tax ourselves for, say, Laramie County taxes itself for open space, it must be that there's some benefit to it. So this survey of Wyoming residents showed there are a number of dimensions of working landscapes and ranches that are important to Wyoming residents. They feel that they're getting personal benefit from living near or knowing that there's an active agricultural economy nearby. Many are concerned about the availability of water for farming and ranching, and that comes back to some comments that were made earlier about urban versus rural use, moving the water out of basin. That's not a problem going away. This is a problem that's going to get even more important as we go forward. And as many as half of Wyoming residents are concerned with transition, recognizing that ranchers and farmers are older than they used to be, and that in many cases where we have a combination of development pressure and aging landowners, more likely to see conversion from ranches out of active ranching and into something else. And folks are concerned about that. We have some similar results from Idaho. We don't have such a survey in Colorado, to my knowledge. I don't suspect that there's strongly different. That could be. So what do we know? We know that ranching is creating agricultural value. We see that readily in the marketplace. The number of cattle being sold, the value of steaks and hamburgers, we know that. That's easy to detect. We know that there's concern with the retention of ranch land in ranching communities. And we know that it's in the best interest of producers, or maybe in the best interest of producers, if these lands could be, if there are opportunities to use these lands in farming and ranching if they so choose. The opportunity to convert them, of course, is also there. Among the things that we can do to make it easier for people to choose to retain their land in farming and ranching is to increase the bottom line. And we can do that potentially through capturing more of the ecosystem services that are being created by the farm and ranch beyond beef or beyond livestock agriculture in order to improve the resilience, the ecological and economic resilience of the system. Now, as communities continue to recognize the importance of agriculture in their communities, then they're more likely to come up with innovative policies to do so. Our Farm Bill has some policies that help us to do that. But more and more often, this is going to be a locally driven sort of approach that either leverages local funds or local projects or local planning with state or federal funds, the GOCO money, the lotteries used often for conservation easement programs. Right? We're leveraging because we see actually that some of these programs are not only good for the local community, they're good for the state, they're good for the country. And that's it. No further questions. Thanks. do recognize that I am the person standing between you and lunch. Just so you know.
Regarding research on kind of contribute to those fund having contribute money out for the community what is the end goal of those things? Seidl or county having received it?
Yeah, CJ, is CJ still there? Yeah, what's it's no levy, isn't it?
No way. That close. And we started rolling up, we sort of like it.
And what does that generate for you? And how many? Well, yes and no, because there are a lot of second home owners, right? And those tend to be nicer homes as well. So one of the things about having a lot of second homeowners is they don't vote.
And you mentioned a lot of these programs are really towards like conservation, like you said, about having conservation program, which is really effective in serving that land for agriculture forever. But those benefits flow not just because we got it as a conservation instead of ranch up to be ranch. And just that 2014, the view is still there in 2020. He's not capturing value then, or the next owner doesn't capture value. Have you started to see any other tools coming along that can help? These are really revenue streams. We're talking about one-time payments for permanent or long-term revenue streams.
Right.
Anything else out there you're seeing?
Yeah, they don't have to be one-time payments, but they often are. And they should, of course, capture that expected value over time if they're done properly of the resources that are being lost, or the development value that's being lost. Some of the innovations would include Super Williamson Act, which has been phased out, I understand, in California, which is a 10-year easement, rolling 10-year easement. You sign up every year for a 10-year easement. That's supposed to reduce the amount of speculation, land speculation that would sometimes occur in that kind of a situation, where if you could make that easement expire like this, then you can take advantage of real estate transaction opportunity, as well as getting some subsidy for waiting for that opportunity to come along. So there are those kind of things. You could create an annuity as opposed to a one-time payment. There are other financial mechanisms that one could use, but the point well taken, Chris. Yeah.
There was a USDA, not more than years ago,
To transfer water out of agriculture. Yeah, oh wow, that's a big number, 70%. And that was of urban populations or general population? Did everyone hear that? No. Study of Wyoming, was it? Or, okay. Found that 70% of people were opposed to transferring water rights out of agriculture. Other questions? Yes. Yeah, that's a good question. There are a number of aspects to that. When you're going for an easement program, usually the easement almost never pays 100%. It's usually somewhere between 20 and 80% of the value. Here in Colorado, we have a number of programs to help that along with either subsidy from GOCO or the tax rebates, or you can exchange your easement on a secondary market if your income isn't high enough to take advantage of the income effect, the income tax write-off. There's some ways to get around that, or to make the incentives higher. The agriculture versus recreation issue comes up quite a bit, and it is perhaps true that general public is willing to pay for recreational access and opportunity. They recognize the agricultural value of the property, yet they don't want to subsidize agriculture per se. They want to pay for views, recreational access, water catchment, the other ecosystem services. They don't necessarily want the preservation bit of it, at least in my experience. What they want is that portfolio. So if they want a community separator between Fort Collins and Loveland, they might be willing to pay for that. Are they willing to pay for an agricultural practice that allows for extensive management? Maybe, but I haven't seen it quite like that. Do you have any experience seeing that? Yeah, I think the emergence of that's a good question. The emergence of the land trusts with specific agricultural preservation objectives gives the public some choice as to who they want to support. It also gives the agricultural operators some choice as to whom might manage their easement. So if you see that you've got the Trust for Public Land, CCALT, CCLT, all these various land trusts that could potentially both purchase or monitor your easement, and a place where you could potentially put your money if you're a lay citizen and want to reflect your values for open space management. You have now a portfolio of choices that are available to you. You could potentially give your money to Nature Conservancy to protect that, or you could give it to CCALT to protect land, and those would have potentially distinctly different priorities as to what it is, what mix they're trying to protect. And then coming from the other side, those CCALT members are out in front promoting, we want to preserve agriculture as well as rural lifestyle, as well as watersheds and things like that. So I think the evolution of the NGO community is very helpful to this cause in creating choice. Yeah, you're right. It's not exactly my area of study, but one of my colleagues does, Dawn Felony, in our department at Research St. John's. She works on this area, and in particular, we're looking at local foods movements, and then explicitly try to link local farmers with people who have demands for local foods. With the evolution of apps and such things, you can actually trace where your food comes from. It seems like that's only an area that's going to improve in its ability to communicate. There are local food movements. There's some good and some bad. We shouldn't have perhaps Fort Collins mangoes. Right? Probably should import those because we're not good at it. So we do need to be rational about what it is we create as our local food, and provide that to market in a more efficient way than trying to say that it's because it's local, it's better. Always. Because it's local and we make it well, then it's better. that's just a question. But Don Filmini would be able to give you more detailed answer. Yes?
So, I don't know how to phrase this question exactly, but in the next 20, 30 years, we're going to see some of the landowners that put their land to conservation easements, and we see less heirs coming to run those agricultural businesses. What happens to the easements when no one wants to contribute money to preserve the land, to manage for weeds, to know the land, and how it's being treated? Do you study, is there an answer or insight to that sort of question?
I can tell you what should happen. I mean, all easements come with a resource management plan that has to be agreed upon by the people who are monitoring it and the people who are providing it, who are giving up their easement and getting compensated for it. That's supposed to go in perpetuity. If it comes to some point where both of those agents no longer feel that it's a good idea to have that easement, it can be expunged. Now, if only one party does and the other doesn't, then we have some sort of legal issue that or maybe a conversation before we have a legal issue on how to deal with that. My suspicion is we'll probably see some more of that as opposed to less of it as we move along. And I just don't have any case history to pull out these.
I'd like to just add a comment to that because it follows up on something Pat said about these programs where we try to hook up heirs with beginner farmer ranchers. At one point when I was looking at to purchase a ranch, I mean, somebody going into it without cattle and without the ranch cannot make it work financially. And so these easements are one of the only things that actually provide for young farmer rancher, beginner farmer ranchers to kind of come into the operation without using the land or the animals and actually be able to sort of financially try to make it work. So I think there's a great link, especially